Entity Framework, EF Core is the next version of Entity Framework, and it's going to be coming into our applications.
Hey, let's mash on that.
Welcome to episode 47 of the ASP.NET Monsters. We are on location at DevTeach Montreal, and we have Julie Lerman here to talk about EF Core.
It's actually Montreal.
Montreal, that's right.
That's right, because it's they speak French here, so it's different. So we're talking about EF Core, the next version of Entity Framework, which is production ready.
That's what they say, yeah. So, is it production ready? I mean, where are we at with EF Core?
Yeah, they also said RC1 was production ready, right? It was go live. Yeah, it RTM'd along with ASP.NET Core last week, June 27th. So it's production ready and stable for what's there, right? And they're very clear about what the boundaries are, along with Core CLR and ASP.NET Core. Like this is what we've got, and that was really their goal for the RTM, right? Not to they were aligning their release with the release of ASP.NET Core. So they said, all right, we can't get everything in there. Right. So let's have something that's stable and useful and actually also usable for, with the focus of websites, with the focus of, not websites, but with the focus of web, of disconnected applications, which is why they hammered on the disconnected change tracking work. And they left things like explicit loading and lazy loading. Well, my lazy loading comment is don't let the door hit you on the way out. So they, those will come later. So what they have now, I mean, there are still some issues with it. Like somebody just recently discovered that there was a big performance problem with included async and include, but was it Nate? One of the guys on the team immediately went, okay, well, first they were like, oh my god, there's what's causing the problem. Okay, it's 70% faster already, but they couldn't get that in. That's going to come in like a quick.
Fast follow
soon
kind of
update.
idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to wait till 1.1. So, but what is in there is stable, and I think it's just important to know what is in there and what isn't.
Right. So we will actually include in the footnotes for the video a link to they actually have a disclosure, a list of all of the things that are not included in this current release, and so we'll link to that.
So there's also the roadmap. And I created a nice handy little bit.ly for it. It's EF Core Roadmap, bit.ly EF Core Roadmap.
That's
so you can always get
easy
to that
remember.
easily. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so you did kind of touch on something, though, that's really interesting to me and I think has been one of the benefits of moving to this model of open source. They had a build that included things that they said are production ready, and it included things like the include and the async bits, and those are all going to be good things. However, the community found that in certain circumstances and using them together, that all of a sudden this performance degradation starts to fall down very, very quickly. And I think it's really cool that we're at a time where Microsoft is actually responding to the community's input that quickly.
Yeah,
it's not making it into the release. That day,
he went, oh my god, yeah, okay, but he found it and fixed it. Unfortunately, it was a day before the RTM.
Yeah, it's unfortunate it didn't make it into RTM.
But it also is something. It took that long for somebody to discover it, which means I'm not making excuses for anybody, but I'm saying it's a little maybe. I mean, it's async and include. That's not an edge case to use it, but he was using a whole bunch of includes and async, and it just everything kind of piled on and made it bad, right? So it was something that nobody had noticed right up until then, and I'm not that. I know people are like, oh, the EF team, but come on, nobody. There's a ton of people using it already and testing it and banging on it.
Yeah.
Nobody caught it. So, at least it's one of those things that not as many people are going to hit and then hopefully it'll
Right.
get
And there's
it'll get in there quickly.
2, maybe 3 cool things that come out of that. Number 1, it kind of shows that they're listening to the community, and number 2, that they're very responsive. So that they care about this product. I believe that these guys want this to work as well as it can work. But number 3, it also
wouldn't you?
totally.
You're a developer, right?
Do you know what?
Anything you're creating.
I used to have this terrible attitude. Like I used to slam IE to no end, right? And and then I met somebody who works on the IE team.
It's fun to do.
It is fun.
It's fun to do.
It was an easy target, right?
I should do it better. Yeah, try.
So then I met someone on the IE team, and he was a real human, and he really wanted it to be better. And I kind of changed my view on how I comment on those kinds of things. And these guys want it to work well. The other thing that it does, though, is it kind of gives them the ability to pause and say, okay, maybe now we can alter our build chain to add a performance gate. This is a common step in a build server process where you can say, look, if we run this kind of thing and it takes longer than X number of milliseconds, break the build, right? So they've got some opportunity to kind of improve how they're delivering things as well.
Yeah. And then, there's even, people like Franz Bouma, right? And he's got LLBL Gen, and and he's freaking brilliant and understands the underpinnings of all this stuff. And he's been doing this. He's got this whole series of performance tests and comparing, obviously, a bunch of different ORMs, including LLBL Gen, which has really good performance also, and then the micros like Dapper, and then and Entity Framework. And so he updates it with the new RTMs and compares it. And he even, if I recall, I can't remember if it was a conversation with that particular issue or something that Rick Strahl's been having a problem with. But, and Rick Strahl's issue, it was like he couldn't tell at first if it was the Asp.Net side or the EF side, but he's kind of filtering it down and thinks really there's something in EF. Anyway, but Franz even said, well, even in all the performance tests I did, and Franz is really, really anal about that. He said, EF Core was faster than EF6 in that, and that, so that was improved. So I don't understand, I didn't even catch why this would have been worse. Right. So it's really some kind of edge cases, and it's not like people are being lazy about testing.
No, that's right, and you can go and see that for yourself. So David, are there things now that if I'm going to start to cut a new project, what do I where's the problem areas for me if I was going to build this for something outside of the what might be the accepted? What are some of the things that are outside of the accepted pieces that didn't make it into the release that we should be concerned about?
Well, probably the most visible piece is just that lazy loading that's not there that people are used to having with EF6, right? But
they'll have less problems with their production software if it's not in there anyway.
That's true. I mean, it's good to be really explicit about how you're
I'm not trying to
things.
be write off lazy loading. I've seen people accidentally misuse it so often.
So let's talk about that though, because there's a lot of guidance out there, and there's a lot of default documentation and default state that shows explicitly this is how you do things, and it includes lazy loading. So why is that? Where do you run into problems with that?
Well, it's when people don't understand how it's working. So the most common thing I've seen is, hey, we've got this web page and it has a grid, and I'm loading up some data and it's taking a really long time. Yeah. We don't understand why. So the first thing, whenever anybody says Entity Framework slow, I say, let's see what's going on in the database. Look, do profiling. Oh, well, we're making,
and plus one queries,
700 round trips to the database to get this to do this foreign key query. What's going on there? Oh, look in the grid. They've got the one of the lazy loaded properties referenced. So what's happening is the grid's being populated. It goes, okay, here's the row. Oh, wait just a second. I gotta go get that lazy loaded property for that row. Go get it. Loading the next row. No,
And so in the context of a web application, obviously that's just a really bad pattern and something we want to avoid. There are times when that might be a valid optimization in the context of a Windows application, right? Where you're lazy loading something that only happens when the user clicks a particular button, maybe they're expanding a row or something, and then that gets
Right,
lazy
you
loaded.
don't know in advance whether you want that related data, and it doesn't make sense to pull it in just in case.
Yeah, but that doesn't really happen in the context of a web application, which is what EF Core is initially targeting. Just because you're dealing with a request, right? Like the request comes in and you get what you need to render the piece of HTML or return the piece of data that you need.
Right, and lazy loading is dependent on the fact that the object that contains the property that you want to lazy load, that object is connected to the context and the database, and that's in a client application. Whereas in a disconnected application, you don't have that, which is why they didn't focus on those things. They wanted to focus on the stuff to push out with Asp.NET Core first.
Right. So a better pattern then, when I need to access one of the properties off of a child table or a related row, what's the better pattern that we should be using then?
Well, first you have to always say it depends, right? Because
we're consulting,
no, because like eager loading, okay, that makes sense, and includes are really easy to write, right? Mm-hmm. So you like include and eager load it, and you get one trip to the database. But the problem is includes are easy to write, and they're even easier to write with EF Core because we've got the then included. It uses the lambda now. But the problem is when you start getting these more get deeper and deeper and deeper into the include, then it it affects how any framework is able to build up the command tree and how that command gets to the database. Now, I haven't looked at this, but I thought I read that there was a change that instead of flattening the data, they're finally doing special queries. So they're not trying to write a query that will flatten the data and bring back all complete rows and then repopulate it. So I think they changed that.
I think it is more efficient now.
Which will make it better.
If you do include all of the related properties, it's still possible to using includes to write a query that returns the entire database.
Yeah,
right?
So
it's not necessarily what you're trying
to
do.
Watch your performance and think about that. And there's also projections, and even pre-EF Core, I was working with a client and they were having a big performance problem, and it was around includes, and they but we need to bring back this. So we broke it down, right? We just broke it down, and it was so much more efficient to have the app make a couple of quick queries to the database to compose that data rather than asking Entity Framework to figure out the 20 layers of includes.
Right. Exactly.
It was an enormous, the difference between 5 seconds and milliseconds.
Sure, and so I guess that kind of points out the fact that using an ORM doesn't divorce you from the need to still understand what's going on in SQL Server.
Profile, or whatever database you're connecting to.
Sure.
And if you can, it just being specific about exactly what it is that you're trying to pull back, right? And that's where I really love projections, because you can tell it, I'm not actually trying to pull back for this particular page that I'm trying to render. I'm not trying to pull back my model classes. I just need these 3 things.
Yeah,
I want to project that into a view model, and I can be really specific about it. So
instead of just bringing back all the data just because it's easy to write. And the problem is, and that's not a criticism of people doing what's easy, because actually that's a good first pass. Do it how it's easy to write. Look for the performance issues, and then tweak it. But also, because I've been so focused on domain-driven design, I'm more likely not to go, well, I have these big fat classes, and there's a property there and a property there and a property over there that I need. So I'm just going to, do a include and just pull back these classes, right? I'm actually going to go, why am I using even those classes? If I just need this, why am I using that? I'm just going to build some classes that represent what it is that I need. Mm-hmm. So and then I can, I don't even have to map them. I can populate them with a projection and kind of go the vModel way.
Yeah.
Right on. So in terms of the you both actually do work in consulting in EF, and so what are the kinds of yeah, there we go. Actually, one of the funny things that a couple of years ago, Dave was actually called the Julie Lerman of Canada And so, when I saw them,
I don't know who that's worse for. Like, first of all,
when I saw
nice
them,
young man, do you really want to be called a middle-aged lady?
when I saw them come into the same room, I was worried about some like galactic event happening where it was like the black hole opened or something. But no, we're safe, we're good, we're still standing.
Yeah.
So in that consulting space, you see a lot of EF code. I assume there's a lot of great code out there, but there's probably some problems as well. Do you guys have some tips about things that developers should avoid, or ways to fall into the pit of success as we're developing with Entity Framework?
I think for me, probably the most common thing I see where people are struggling is they'll come to me with some performance problems, and it's usually related to they're trying to do batch loading, like they're loading from a file or something, trying to load data into their database.
The scenario is I have 100,000 records and that need to be split into 3 different tables, and I want them put out here. Okay.
And with EF6, the solution there was to just not do that. To use a SQL bulk insert or something like that, and not try to go through your model, because EF just wasn't, and ORMs in general usually aren't well tuned to doing these bulk inserts and bulk updates. But I think that's kind of changed a bit in EF Core, and I think it might be more feasible now.
Yeah,
they're actually doing bulk inserts.
It's possible.
Yeah. So it might not still be advisable, but I don't think...
just because it's there, it's still profile. Like we've got all these nice bells and whistles, but it's just the same with the lazy loading. You need to know what you're working with, right? Yeah. And it works. Like, yay, the test passed. That's nice, but that's not always necessarily. You still haven't done it the best way, and sometimes you don't find that out until you've got load.
Yeah.
And whether you're talking about data, like going from, I've got a sample app with 5 rows of data, to a real app with, a real database with hundreds of thousands of rows. So that,
So as far as that goes, I mean, I've actually seen that on projects where I've worked on as well, where we get into prod and the thing works really, really well with the green release. And things are moving along, and then you get 6 months down the road and people start complaining. You get a year down the road and it's like, we can't use this app anymore because there's just so much data that's in there. So I'm assuming then that there's probably a pretty good case to do some data loading before you actually go to prod. When you're talking about doing the profiling, but profiling looks different when...
Well, here's actually a really interesting example of something that's really easy to do. It compiles and it works. And you wouldn't know, if you don't understand how things work, you're not going to find a problem with this until you get a lot of data, which is not understanding, and this changes in EF Core, but not understanding that if you're doing something like executing raw SQL and then appending a link query to do the filtering. Right, with the EF6 and earlier, Entity Framework will execute the raw SQL, pull everything into memory, and then do the link. And then people might do, essentially select star, right, as the raw SQL, and then dot, and then where, blah, 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 right? So first get all 5 million records, pull them into memory, and then filter down to the 3 that you want.
So understanding how that chaining works.
That's exactly what we used to see with data sets. People would just tie the data set to a table because and do the where clause in memory.
IntelliSense is happy to do it for you. Yeah. The compiler is happy to do it for you.
It should almost throw a warning at compile time. Like, you're using a
Roslyn. I talked to Kathleen Dollar about...
It's Julie going, no?
I actually, I talked to Kathleen once about that. Kathleen Dollar, because she's big into it. She really is using that for, to do those kinds of things. And I said, somebody, of course people are like, well, you do it. I'm like, no, I'm busy doing other stuff. But somebody needs to write some of Entity Framework guidance into Roslyn to look for those kinds of things, and then just pop them up and say, this is something that might not be what you think it's going to be. So, watch for that. So the interesting thing in EF Core, that particular problem has been addressed because link to entities now is able to look at a link statement, at a query, and determine, well, not just the raw SQL, whatever's in the query, and determine which is stuff for the database and which is stuff for in memory. So it goes. This goes in two directions. One is the SQL example. I could take a raw SQL statement. Now we don't have SQL query anymore. It's from SQL, but it's still the same thing. Like DB set from SQL, put the raw SQL in there, and then append a filter. Right. Entity framework will literally be able to, depending on how you write it, will literally be able to compose that.
Build up
because
the expression.
It will if it looks at the link query, like the where predicate that you put on, if it looks at that and goes, oh, I can turn that into SQL, no problem. And it will compose the whole thing and send it all to the server. The whole thing gets executed on the server. The opposite of that, the opposite other good thing of its ability to determine, okay, this can happen in this can happen in the database, this has to happen in memory, is when we've written our own methods. How many times have you seen people go, I've got an error that says SQL server can't figure out how to create SQL from that. That's because they'll write a link query and include some of their own logic, like their own function in it. Put it in the link query, it compiles and it builds, and it fails at runtime when any framework's trying to interpret it into SQL. So now, and again, you got to. It's not a blanket, it's going to work for everything, but you got to check and test and make sure. But now what it'll do is to say, all right, well, I can deal with this. I'm going to do this part in the database. I'll send that up to the database, and when it comes back, now I can process your thing.
So it's more intelligence.
It could also be really, you could create a different kind of a nightmare by doing that, like a performance or whatever. So, but it's feasible. And, like with everything, another thing, sure, you can shoot yourself in the foot with it. So don't just blindly use these features without understanding how they're working and making sure that you're watching.
But it is more intelligent now in that it's able to differentiate between something that can be optimized in memory versus something that can be optimized via SQL. So that's pretty cool. Okay, we got a little bit more time here. There's kind of an anti-ORM thing that I do sense, and there are developers out there who are saying, I'm not going to use Entity Framework, I'm going to Dapper. Is there any reason why you shouldn't, or any reason why you should?
Use what works for you. And I just did it. I just wrote it. I finally looked at Dapper after hearing about it for so much. I was like, all right, I better take a look at this. And the reason was because I kept hearing people say that they're using a hybrid solution. They're like, Entity Framework is good at this, really good at this, so I'm using it for these things in my application. And Dapper is really excellent at this, and these are the places in my application where I'm going to benefit from that. So I was like, okay, now I want to see about this. And I actually did an article. I did an article on that for MSDN magazine, which is my excuse for digging into like a new technology. Nobody's paying me to do it, so I'm like, I'll just research it for an article. And the cool part was, that the guys from the team who work on Dapper, they tech reviewed it for me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So Mark and. Yeah, it was great.
Perfect. So do you have any other stuff in the works right now for knowledge sharing or articles, books, anything like that you got?
Books? Oh, sorry. A lot of work. No, I'm actually just finishing up a Entity Framework 6 course for Pluralsight because I did an Entity Framework in the Enterprise course years ago, and it's still really popular, and it's really important. It's architecture stuff, but with like if you're using Entity Framework, like where does it fit in? And so I really needed to update that for a number of reasons. One, when I did that, I did it with EF4 object context, and I think in Visual Studio 2008 or 2010, and so I needed to update it for those things, but also my ideas have changed. Like, how I, like whether or not to use generic repositories right? Unit of work, that kind of stuff. And when I see people like going, oh, I'm watching the course and I'm doing the repository and unit of work, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I don't do it like that.
We were talking about how we've for 2 years we posted about things about doing it that way or whatever, and do we go back and address everything on our blog that we've been talking about? Do we go erase that now?
But the interesting thing was for doing this version of the course, and addressing that was one of the things, because I'm doing testing, and also I've learned so much about domain-driven design. So I actually have I build this whole thing up, and I do a huge refactoring, and I pull in bounded contexts, and do and then align how does the entity framework work with these DDD patterns and value objects and all this kind of stuff. So I'm doing all that, and also Entity Framework 6 gave us a simpler way to use mocking. So. And it's not as beautiful as the in-memory and EF Core. Oh my God. Yeah. That's so awesome. But so redoing all of that stuff, and I just have to do the testing module and finish that. But the other interesting thing about that is, first of all, I'm using EF6 to do it, right? Especially when I started, EF Core was not even, it was EF7 still. But I can, it's EF6 is still much richer for all of the things I'm expressing, although a lot of the lessons and the patterns and things are the same.
Right.
There will be some technologies like value, complex types aren't supported. Right. And then I'm not going to be showing the in-memory, right? So there are some things that'll be a little different. But the other interesting thing about that is, because I've been telling people who are asking, well, EF6 or EF7, and I'm making sure they understand, EF6 is going to be around for a while. And, me doing this big course, I've been spending, taking me a lot of time. It's a big course and a lot of important information. Not just, it's not how to EF6, it's architecture stuff. Right. But that I'm making that huge investment still in something that's going to be Entity Framework 6 and pushing it out even after EF Core has RTM'd.
Yeah, it's not, EF6 is not going away, and even just from a perspective of corporate adoption rate, it's still going to be a year or 2 years out before people are looking at doing EF Core over top of EF6.
And that's, there's the whole question of our existing stuff. Should we try to upgrade it? That could be potentially really painful.
Right.
There's no simple way to do it. One thing I've been telling people is, if there's stuff in EF Core that you're we can't live without this. There's a piece of our application that we have to work on all the time, and we really would benefit from having it in there. Go back to GDD, bounded context, break things apart, leave that stuff in EF6 that's working that you're not touching a lot, and just change that little one if you have to.
Right.
Yeah, but look at look at that roadmap. Look at what's in EF7.
Understand what
and decide based on that.
The other thing to remember is that if you are wanting to take advantage of something like Asp.Net Core MVC, it doesn't actually need to run. What's that?
You can mix them.
You can absolutely mix. You can run on the full framework and include EF6 and have that in your project. It doesn't go away from that. So
you can. Yeah, I've done it. I actually did a couple of articles on that because I wanted to see about that using ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core MVC. Right, there's things in there you really want to take advantage of. Even the services, the IOC services in there. Yeah. With an an API that you build that's using EF6 DB context, and you can even. And as you build dependency injection into there, you can even use the services in your, that you set up in startup. Yes. And then ASP.NET Core, you can use those services to use, dependency injection for the EF6 API that you created. So you can do that. And you can use EF Core. You can create an EF Core, and I've done this. You create EF Core projects. So, first of all, you created I keep things separate. So my domain classes are in one project, my DB context is in another project, and now I've got a full .NET app. WPF.
Right.
Windows forms, whatever, and you can still talk to them like through an API or services or something like that.
Exactly.
Cool.
So lots of options and all of those kinds of things. So Julie, thank you so much for coming on here. Yeah, absolutely.
Chat about it.
We'll catch
finally meet you guys in person.
Yeah, absolutely, and we will catch up with
my
you more.
Canadian doppelgangers.
Yeah. They look a lot alike too. Like, I mean, it maybe doesn't.
Schoolboys. I was. We've got to include this, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we were hanging out last night with in Montreal with their wives, and we were going around listening to some jazz music and stuff. And Lori Lalonde was speaking at a user group, and somebody said to her, "Oh, I saw Julie Lerman wandering the streets of Montreal. She was hanging out with a bunch of schoolboys." These guys, thank you, that made me feel really old. Oh my God.
Awesome.
That was so funny.
Thank you for joining us today, everyone. Julie, thanks again for being on the show. We'll include the links, and it's bit.ly/EF Roadmap.
EF Core Roadmap.
EF Core Roadmap. We'll include the links in the video notes. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next time on the ASP.NET Monsters.